Hello and welcome back to Talking Planning. So today I'd like to run through a new little segment. Greenfield gripes. So you've probably got two questions about that. First of all, what on earth does greenfield mean? And second of all, why do I have a problem with some of the ways that greenfield development is done? So to answer the first question, greenfield development is simply a case where you start building on a new piece of land that's never been built on before, i.e. a greenfield site. The good thing about a greenfield site is it's a blank canvas. There are no bits of old infrastructure that necessarily have to be accounted for, and it basically has endless opportunities and possibilities that you can work with. To answer the second question, look at these couple of snippets of film.
Providence Parade. Sounds pretty flash. Oh, and there's a car park full of late model SUVs. And a billboard advertising the local market. Still, seems pretty nice. Ah, did I just pass one house or five? And why are they all the same colour? At least there's some open space up ahead. Oh. Wait, there's a temporary fence blocking it. I can't get through. Don't forget the obligatory housing estate skid marks. Street art. Now that's more like it. Ah, and that's Ripley Town Centre. But where's the town?
Maybe my answer to the second question was a little bit harsh, but I do need to highlight that many housing estates are often designed in a way that is a little bit unimaginative. This, I should point out, is not because they are a greenfield development, but it's because there are cost pressures and there are profit pressures involved in that. And it sometimes means that unimaginative designs make it to the final stage and that the actual quality of the end product is not necessarily as good as people had hoped for. And this, of course, compromises on the outcomes at the end. So, have a look at this. Scintillating, it is not. But repetitive style is not really the only issue here. So I should point out that many housing estates have absolutely woeful public transport. So for example, I went through Ripley, which is a new estate just past Springfield, and I decided that I wanted to travel there by bus. And outside of peak hour, the bus only runs Monday to Friday regardless, but it's every 2 hours between Springfield and Numanto via Ripley. The good thing though was that the service was, at least on the day I caught it, operated by a really nice new bus, which was a pleasant change, and it shows that there is a little bit of investment into public transport. The only problem was that despite using a brand new Volvo and Custom Coaches Endeavour bodied bus, which is really nicely finished and clean, I was the only passenger there. So I think there's a little bit of work to do with ridership. So a lot of housing estates improve their financial returns by building reasonably large houses on fairly small lots, and that means that they build really close to their boundaries and don't leave a lot of space for a full-size backyard or necessary for lots of garage space. And in areas where you can easily walk to the shops and there's localised employment and lots of open and wide green space, that's great, and I think we should actually encourage it. However, I don't think a lot of housing estates do that well. I get the feeling that a lot of housing estate marketers, when they define highly walkable open space, they're talking about the fact that they actually just have a footpath. Personally, I don't really call that great walkability and accessibility. I define good walkability and good accessibility by ease of being able to navigate on foot, which isn't just having a footpath, it's being able to walk short distances to key amenities like shops and employment and public transport. Judging by the footage before, I wouldn't describe Ripley as being highly walkable and in close proximity to lots of goods and services and employment opportunities. So whilst travelling through Ripley, I also didn't see a single bicycle. And given that I was the only passenger on the bus and I didn't see many others walking around, I am quite confident in suggesting that the vast majority of people travel by private car, and it's pretty much intended that that's almost the only means of transport. The other thing I noticed is from Providence Parade, which was in the first housing estate I went through to Ripley Town Centre, I noticed that I did not see a single footpath. And given that there was several kilometres in between those, and the road that connects those is a 100km/h road, I'm not convinced that it's a safe and practical walk for anyone to do. Now, not only is this an issue of safety, it's also an issue of housing affordability. One of the big challenges with private vehicles is they require so much extra land to accommodate them, which requires you to build garages, additional parking, and a lot of ancillary needs associated with the car. Further, cars are expensive to buy and operate. You know, you've got to think about fuel, tyres, servicing, the cost of buying the car, and the other killer, depreciation. This means from an affordability perspective, designing car-based suburbs really isn't a good move. And in fact, not only does it increase the cost of housing, it's increasing the cost of living. Now, before you just assume that I'm a car-hating commie who just wants to ruin your current way of life, I have a car and I absolutely love it. I've got a Ford Falcon G6E, which is comfortable. And I'm actually proud to own a car built in Australia by Australians from a bygone era of manufacturing. And a couple of things. First of all, on a country road, it's great fun to drive. It handles nicely. It's comfortable for long distances. And it's really good on the motorway. And second of all, it's not another bloody SUV. But there are things that spoil the car ownership experience. I really don't like sitting in traffic on the highway. It's so boring and monotonous in peak hour. Supermarket car parks are havens for trolley dents and poor parking standards. And another thing to keep in mind is there are lots of people who are forced to drive that would rather wouldn't. They don't even enjoy the experience like motoring enthusiasts like myself do. Imagine if they didn't have to drive. Our roads would be quieter, safer, and more enjoyable for those who really enjoy the experience of driving. As far as I'm concerned, car ownership should be a choice, not really a necessity. If I had the choice, I would commute by public transport. I wouldn't even think about driving to and from work. I'd pick up the shopping from a local shop on the walk home more frequently. And I'd keep the car for the weekends for having a nice drive out in the country or doing something leisurely. Or for moving heavy and awkward furniture that you can't take with you on the bus or other public transport. You know, there are some areas of inner and middle ring Brisbane where you can live a lifestyle like this, but unfortunately, I really don't see it being possible in a lot of these new build housing estate suburbs. Now, beyond the personal preferences that I have in this, I think there are some pretty big social implications with this sort of design. Let's say theoretically you've got children. Now, it's likely that your children may not be able to walk to school because the school's not close enough, walk down to the shops, or even easily go to the park, and that you'll have to drive them. And heaven forbid, you decide that you want to go out into the city for a night out. Now that sounds lovely, and you know, if you've bought an apartment closer to town or a townhouse in the middle ring suburbs, that's not such an issue. However, if you're taking a taxi from an outer suburb estate and going into town, I dread to think what the taxi fare is. I should also keep in mind that given the lower costs of housing and land packages are available, I cannot help but think they are targeted towards young families. And unfortunately, if you think about those lifestyle factors, I just don't see how this stacks up as a good move. Sure, you might save a bit of money in the cost to buy that property, but I think there is a lot of lifestyle factors that are being skimped on in the process. So as far as I'm concerned, is a cheap house and land package far out in the burbs really that affordable? I'm not so convinced. Now first, on that, let's look at parking. My old man used to work in the city in the early to mid-90s, and he would occasionally drive into town. And he guessed that parking today is sort of $30 to $40 a day. So I did a little bit of research and looked up what the cost of parking is. And roughly speaking, unless you book online or book ahead in advance, parking in Brisbane is going to cost you $80 a day. If you did that once a week and times 80 by 52, you're over $4,000 a year already. Now, of course, there are discount rates available for people who park more frequently in town. But even with those discount rates, you're probably still going to be spending around $4,000 a year or even more just on parking. It's still awfully expensive. The other thing is taxi and rideshare journeys are also quite pricey. So I did a taxi fare estimate from Queen Street Mall to Providence Drive, Ripley. And the taxi price estimate was between $95 and $115 one way. From the airport, estimates were between $117 and $143. Rideshare apps were significantly cheaper, but the best price that I saw from the city to Ripley was still over $60 and roughly $85 to $90 from the airport. Now, I should point out that most suburban journeys between Brisbane and the suburb and Brisbane airport and that suburb are significantly cheaper than that. And then let's look at something that's not about just the cost of that vehicle. Just think of the travel time itself. You know, if you live in a inner or middle ring suburb in Brisbane, you can probably do a door-to-door commute of usually 45 minutes to an hour. But if you look to an area like Ripley or somewhere in those sort of outer regions, you're going to be looking at 2 hours each way quite frequently. And of course, I should point out, not everyone works in Brisbane CBD. However, if you are working in a professional setting, it is the general standard that most people are working in the CBD or within a inner city sort of suburb. So it's something to keep in mind if you are, working. How's that travel time going to affect you and your lifestyle? And on top of that, you should probably add in a couple more things. What is the quality of local schools like, particularly if you've got kids or you're thinking about having kids? What's the cost of travel in your area? And the other thing is, what actually is available locally? What can you do within a short proximity of your area, within a short walk or a short drive? What is there actually to do? I certainly found that from some of these estates, like Ripley, for example, they might have some lovely houses in them. There's not a lot around locally, so you have to go to Springfield or further out to Ipswich or something like that if you want to, do your shopping or go and meet people. And I think that might get tiring over time. So I think if you are interested in looking at any of these further out property, house and land packages, you really need to weigh up all of these options before you put down your deposit. Overall, I hope this video has highlighted a few little things that you should keep in mind before you consider a lot of these house and land packages that are low cost and are further out in the burbs. And some of the challenges that need to be considered with outer suburb greenfield living. I hope to see you again soon on Talking Planning.